very good evening to you and welcome. This is Face the Nation. On the 17th of August, people elected members to Parliament. No party was able to secure a majority. Now there is talk of a national government. And what is the national government the UNP and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party are talking about? This week we saw the US Assistant Secretary of State, Nisha Biswal, arriving in Sri Lanka and saying that there would be another resolution in Geneva in September. However, this time around, it is in support of the Sri Lankan government. What is exactly happening? Has the United States changed its policy? Or are they really supporting the government to ensure that there is accountability and reconciliation in the island? To discuss all this and more, we have with us three guests as usual. This evening we have Tamara Kununagam, Sri Lankan former ambassador to Sri Lanka's former ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva. A very good evening to you, ma'am. And I have with us this evening, Minister of Justice Vijayadasa Rajapaksa and also Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, former UPFA MP and leader of the Liberal Party. Let's start off with Ms. Kununagam this evening. Ms. Kununagam, a national government, what is your view on this? The time starts now.
Well, your question reminds me of a story when another journalist asked Mahatma Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization? And his response apparently was, it would be a good idea. Now, I would be tempted to say that it would be a good idea, but on certain conditions, because a national government, to me, implies the nation. And the nation is people within a recognized territory with a recognized sovereign government. And it includes all people, all communities inside that nation. Now, there are two conditions, I would say, to have a genuine national government. One, it should be representative of all the political forces, political parties in Parliament, and should also represent all the communities within the nation state. Two is that government should be working as, the purpose should be the national interest, defending the national interest. So there are three dimensions, I would say, that are of concern to Sri Lanka today, national, in terms of national interest, national concerns. One, I think, is the socio-economic situation and improving the well-being of the masses of the people. So I'm now talking about the public interest versus the private interest. Two, I think there's a question that we have to deal with is national reconciliation. Now, the national reconciliation, we should have all the communities involved, and I don't think the present national government that we're talking about includes the TNA, it doesn't include the JVP, it doesn't include a number of parties, and probably it will not include a section of the SLP. So it cannot be a national government, and I wonder how this national government is going to handle those two issues. Third important aspect of a national government would be to defend the national interests of the country internationally, so which will mean national sovereignty and independence of the country. So those are, I would just try to point out that those are the three fundamental issues that the national government should deal with. But looking at it from the point of view of representation, this national government that we are seeing emerging is not a national government, because it doesn't involve all the different forces. Even if all of the SLFP joined together with the UNP, it still wouldn't be a national government, because you would still have an opposition. So that would amount, in fact, to a political fraud if that is promoted as a national government. On the question of those issues that we're dealing with, I wonder whether the present government is actually has a response to the promotion of the public interest. What is their economic program? What is their policy? Is it going to be something that's going to be dependent on the outside? Are we creating jobs for people inside the country, or are we going to continue to export 25% of our labor force to foreign countries where we have no control? And on the question of national sovereignty and independence, I think we should we can raise this issue when we talk about the Human Rights Council.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kununagam, Sri Lanka's former representative to the United Nations in Geneva. I now move on to Minister of Justice, Dr. Vijayadasa Rajapaksa, who is also a President's Counsel. Now, we have seen national governments in the world. Example, in 1930 we saw the formation of a national government in the United Kingdom, and then we saw Winston Churchill taking this forward from 1941 to 1945. There was a national crisis. The crisis was to combat World War II. Is there a need for a national government now? And what is the national government concept that the UNP is talking about now?
I don't think that anybody can give a definite definition with regard to the national government, depending on the circumstances under which a country has faced. That different countries have formed national governments. As you suggested, the best example, Winston Churchill, he formed when there was a disastrous situation during the World War II. But our problem was not that, but we were also fighting for a long, more than almost 3 decades. It was a horrifying war that was fought in Sri Lanka, although it is not an international war, although it was an internal war that affected very badly, that's every citizen, every sector of the society, the development, that's the harmony, peace, rule of law, everything was deteriorated during that period. And not only now, even during last 2 to 3 decades, there were a lot of discussions, dialogues with regard to the forming of a national government, but in all these situations we fail. You may recall even in 2006 that there was a MOU signed between the former President Mahinda Rajapaksa and Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe as the opposition leader, not to form a government but just to assist for them to fight the war with the national and public interest. Now of course that's national government that we are thinking of under the present setup, as Ms. Gunagam said, that they do not, the JVP and TNA, they are not included in it. But the thing is that is with the idea that if it is a national government, that all those minor political parties should come and take part in the government, or that they should take over some portfolios as ministers or deputy ministers. That is not the concept. Just because they do not join as a coalition government with us to work together, but for the broader perspective, that we, even long before the both elections, the presidential and parliamentary, said we will invite for, even if we get the majority in the parliament, still we will invite for a national government, because there are lot of burning issues to be resolved. One aspect is that we will have to go for a new constitution, then the upholding of the rule of law, then the judicial system, that's there were a lot of political interference, influence, that there was no independent judicial system here. Then about the bribery and corruption commission. In addition to that, there were so many other important laws to be passed, including right to information bill, which had been struck during last 14 years in the cabinet. And similarly, we have suggested another bill, independent audit commission bill, which will be very helpful to curb corruptions in the public sector. And likewise, that there are so many other matters of national interest where we need the support of each and every sector of this our country and of all the political parties, and that is why we are forming a different type of national government, which is defined in our constitution when we enacted the 19th amendment on 28th of April this year.
Thank you very much, Minister Rajapaksa. Also, congratulations on the appointment as a parliamentarian and also the Minister of Justice of the new cabinet. Moving on to Professor Raja Vijayasinghe, former UPF MP and leader of the Liberal Party. Professor Vijayasinghe, the minister said that they are trying to form a different kind of national government. Do you think it would be a success? Your time starts now.
Well, let me say that my approach to politics in the last year has been based on a very simple principle, which is to avoid the worst possible scenario. Last year I felt that a continuation of Mahinda Rajapaksa's government the way it was going on would have been a disaster for the country, and that's why I supported President Maithripala Sirisena. I also supported him because I thought there was a very good manifesto that should have been taken forward as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, it soon transpired that no one was interested in the manifesto as a whole, and the many reforms that we pledged were completely forgotten, except for the 19th Amendment. But even in that, there were matters that were not part of a consensus. And things that seemed to me essential, including the Audit Bill, the Right to Information Act, both of which were pledged, electoral reform, which seems to me so important, a code of conduct, and, of course, the changing of standing orders, strengthen Parliament were all forgotten. And it struck me then that perhaps the worst-case scenario following the election would be a UNP government on its own, because I felt that then the role of the President would be diminished. And I think he himself felt the same, and that is why he decided to accept Mahinda Rajapaksa's candidacy, because he wanted to strengthen the SLFP or the UPFA. I think for a variety of reasons, lots of animosity is developed, and what should have been a much better performance by a united UPFA didn't happen, and the UNP got the largest number of seats, although I think the week before even the President thought that might not be the case. Now, as a consequence of this, you have a very large number of UNPs, but still not enough to form a government on its own. And I think it's a very good thing to have a coalition. I take Tamara's point that what we are looking at is not perhaps a national government, but I think it's a very good idea to have a coalition government at this stage, because I think all the pledges in President Maithripala Sirisena's manifesto should be fulfilled, starting with electoral reform, most importantly of all. Now, I think the real problem with this is there was a clause in the new constitution which kept to the pledge to reduce the cabinet to 30 and non-cabinet ministers to 40. But a little clause was put in to allow for an expanded version of this, and this was in the case of a national government. I actually introduced a motion against this, because I think if you have a genuine coalition government or national government, people should not be asking for portfolios. And I hope that in the end there is a coalition in which the two major parties are represented. But I also hope that this nonsense of making the cabinet larger and larger, believing that people can only come together if you give them perks, is not something that should be acceptable. I wish we hadn't put that clause in. The definition of national government in English is to include the political parties. The definite article means all the parties should be there. The Sinhala just says paksha. But I don't think we're going to have a national government. But I'm all in favor of a coalition government in which it is not a sole UNP government, but the two major parties are represented.
Thank you very much, Professor Raja Vijayasinghe, leader of the Liberal Party and former UPFA nationalist parliamentarian. I now move on to the journalist round. Let me introduce our journalist this evening. Good evening, Nadeem. Nice to have you on board, as usual.
Good to be with you.
And Faraz Shaukat Ali, our independent investigative journalist attached to News First, and also former diplomat and also attached to News First, Mr. Bandula Jayasekara. Nice to have you on board, Bandula.
Thanks.
So let's start off with you today.
Yeah. Now, Tamara, my question is this very interesting thing. Your good friend, Mangala Samaravira, embraces Nisha Biswal. That's what we saw, like, before the press conference. There was a time where even President Rajapaksa and certain people didn't want to meet Nisha Biswal, even the ministers. Then you see that, and then I see a Daily Mirror cartoon today. It's the Daily Mirror. It's owned by, I mean, you can say, part of the government, and says Uncle Sam pumping the national government. Your thoughts, Tamara, on this?
Well, it doesn't really surprise him, because we've heard a lot from the position of the UNP has been that the previous UPFA government went too far with the Chinese, and we have to now balance it out, and we have to go pro-Western. But that's only I think it's more for the gallery, because we know the UNP has always been pro-Western, pro-market oriented. So it is not surprising that the United States is welcomed with open arms in Sri Lanka. Now, I think that what we need to know is even the question of the national government. The reason for pushing towards a national government, I think there's one, of course, to ensure the stability of the present regime, the UNP regime, because the UNP happens to be a reliable ally for the United States, but not a stable one because they don't have a majority. So I think that both the UNP and Washington would like to see a stable government. So all this move towards the so-called national government, which in fact means a coalition government, coalition, the ruling class. We were talking about SLP, UNP, it's the ruling class, the dominant ruling class, that they will get together. But it's so that the US wants to see here a reliable and a stable ally in order for it to promote its strategic interests in the region. When Kerry came to Colombo, he said that actually. He said, we are here because we want to be a leader in the region, among other things, the leadership in the region. And so that's one thing, and it's very important for us to understand it, because we have to look at the geopolitical context and the emergence of China as now the #1 economy. And so they need to be able to contain China. And Sri Lanka is in a strategic maritime corridor, located on this corridor, and they need to have the regime here who will be a reliable ally. And when Mangala says, I've heard him say that sovereignty is out of date, I think this is of major concern. And that's why I talked about national government also should be defending national sovereignty and independence. And I think what we are probably going to see is there might be a lot of deals being made. We don't know what the deals are behind the scenes, but it will probably become more clear to us at the Human Rights Council once we see, first of all, the report of the High Commissioner, and second, the resolution itself.
Sorry. Minister, this is for you. Tamara spoke of political fraud. In that context, you have people like Krishanta Kure, who has given up his position on the national list in favor of greater things. So is one of these greater things the appointment of Anoma Gamage? What does she bring to the table?
That is a decision of the party, because that they were dedicating their time, that's their, the service were given for a long period, especially that there were less Sinhalese representation in the eastern province. And therefore that Ms. Anoma Gamage, that she was the deputy minister even during the last short period government, and that we wanted her to continue with that services, especially the representation for the East. Because it's a mixed population in East.
Where is her husband elected from?
That is also from the East.
Right, so there you are then. Two people from the same family.
Yes.
Sounds rather suspiciously like family business
That
again.
there are so many, even when Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president,
Right.
his
But you all
brothers were
complained about
ministers,
it.
his other brother was the speaker, his other brother was the
You don't have
secretary
to
defense.
repeat it.
But they were all
No,
elected.
we have not repeated.
But they were
That's
all elected.
Mr.
They didn't come from the national
No,
list.
no, that's you are trying to give a wrong interpretation, because Mrs. Gamage was appointed was the national list even in the last election. And this election, Mr. Daya Gamage, that we didn't give him a place in the national list, that he contested and people elected him. He was the opposition leader of the provincial council prior to that in the eastern province.
So was Chamal
There
Rajapaksa,
is nothing
so
wrong.
was Namal Rajapaksa, and so was...
No, we are not following that
all
kind of
these.
thing.
Yeah, but you just referred to it.
No, I don't think that you must get into that much of, that petty issues. Into
They're
these
not
national-
petty.
Ms.
national
Rajapaksa,
things.
I'd like
Rather,
to...
they're not
These
petty.
Ms.
national
Rajapaksa,
things.
I'd like
Rather,
to
they're not
I'd actually like to focus on a fairly current issue. I saw in this morning's newspapers that you had said that repealing the Prevention of Terrorism Act is not a priority for this government. I'm asking this question in the context of Geneva and the Human Rights Council. We've seen the PTA was an issue a few years ago. I'm sure even Tamara and Rajiva can attest to this. Is it not a priority to repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act because there is no longer pressure calling for its repeal?
Throughout our dialogue with the international rapporteurs that during last few months, that it was not taken up as a priority issue, and there was no any demand made, but still that some people have doubt in the south that still that there could be LTT elements, even though not in Sri Lanka, maybe in some other parts of the world. And therefore certainly that we will discuss all those issues with the stakeholders, in the future, but the question that was asked by the media as to whether we are going to give the prominence to this for the purpose of abolishing it, that's we have not made any preparation for that kind of issue.
Professor Rajiv Vijay Singh, I'd like to ask you a similar question as well. How important is it for Sri Lanka moving forward? We're talking about democratic reforms, electoral reforms, rewriting the constitution, etc., etc. But I've noticed that over the past, ever since the run-up to the presidential election and even at the parliamentary election, this Prevention of Terrorism Act, which was described by opposition MPs back in the day as draconian, and even civil rights groups, civil society groups and NGOs abroad as well. How important is it for Sri Lanka to be rid of the prevention?
I think it is quite important. I mean, I find it sad that there was much pressure against the last government by so-called civil society, and all that pressure has failed. But I think that is a pattern we will find repeated with what the so-called international community. I do think it was a pity that the Rajapaksa government, after the war was won, did not immediately move to a strong reconciliation program. There was a certain understanding that things like emergency regulations and the PTA would be got rid of. And I think they should have been got rid of then. I think they should be got rid of now. I think there are certain other ways to actually ensure national security, which I think is vital. But I think because you have these fallback positions, and these are positions I have argued for the last 5 years, the National Human Rights Action Plan, which wasn't taken seriously enough, also talks about not having such draconian measures. I think when you have such draconian measures, you forget that the way to really deal with terrorism is through integration. You know, what you have to do is work towards reducing the motivation. I believe very strongly that you are absolutely right to get rid of terrorism, because when terrorism happens, even anodyne old Tony Blair said it, you have to be firm with it. But you also have to remember that the people who become terrorists have had certain provocations because of an almighty state. And one of those provocations is precisely draconian suppressive measures. So what any state should be aiming at is an integrational process that allows people to feel part of the body politic, to empower them, not only with political power, but with also economic power. And for that, I think it's vital that there should be much more education. You know, I feel rather redundant when Tony Blair says education is the key. I've been saying that for 5 years, and saying that the Rajapaksa government did a great job on infrastructure, but didn't do enough on human resources. It is that empowerment that is necessary, not draconian measures.
Rajiv,
Minister, can I...
Hold on for a second, Nadindas Bandula.
what I want to ask is, in the presence of the Minister of Justice, now some of his MPs are going and saying, close down the bribery commission. Right? I don't know whether they are educated or uneducated, but they are saying UNP MPs. How do you see that?
Well, again, I think one of the problems with the bribery commission was that it simply wasn't effective. I mean, these are areas where we argued that it should have more teeth and greater transparency.
Yeah, so without politicians giving that teeth, they are saying...
Of course, no, I agree, and this is part of the problem, but it's all turned into sound bites. And this is where, you know, I think Mr. Rajapaksa knows, soon after the government was elected, I sent him a long list of things on judicial reform. He didn't even answer my letter. I was deeply disappointed because I thought he was idealistic.
He will now.
But no, I think part of the problem, I think the great problem, and I've said this again and again, from January 8th, the UNP was running for election and running for election and nothing but running for election, and all the promises about good government, about judicial reform were completely forgotten. I think that is one of the reasons I'm actually ashamed of a government of which I was part of, because I thought they'd move right. I can only hope now that Mr. Rajapaksa and the rest of the UNP, and to temper the UNP, the coalition, will actually concentrate on reform and reform and reform. And I hope my letter will at least now get some attention.
Minister Rajapaksa, you've been a crusader who fought against corruption over the years. 2007, we saw the manner in which you were the chairman of the COPE committee. Your report was quite daring. I would say you named several individuals as ministers, and then 4 to 5 days after, we saw 18 MPs crossing over from the opposition to the government as well. However, the last 8 months, there were issues relating to good governance and even corruption within the UNP regime. And you were very silent.
No, I think that's even Professor Rajiv will agree with me. that the system which was prevailing in the parliament, that COPE, Committee on Public Enterprises, and Public Accounts Committee, both were chaired by cabinet ministers, and the majority of members of those committees were either ministers or deputy ministers. But it never happens in any developed country, any democratic form of country. The purpose of having such select committee is for the legislator to monitor the conduct of the executive. But members of the executive itself sitting as members of the committee is the biggest issue that I raised so many times in the parliament, but the former government didn't want to adhere to the good governance procedures which has
Let's
been
talk about
recognized.
corruption
Can I
during the last
interrupt on
8
that
months?
because he mentioned my name? I agree with the principle, but what I find horrifying is that when I proposed amendments to standing orders 2 years ago, and to make precisely these points, I got no support from the UNP. None at all. Nobody was interested. And then this year, when our government was elected, the first pledge in the manifesto was to amend standing orders. No interest in that. I brought the matter up. I pushed and Lakshman Kiriyal actually helped me. We got it on the agenda. Nobody from the UNP came to the meetings. It's all there. The points he make are
do you
all
agree,
there. But he didn't attend the last meeting.
Just to add what
Yes.
what Professor did was in fact that we studied all those things. But our biggest problem was that we had only 41 members in the parliament. For whatever the matter that we supported, that's we knew we cannot go through it. That was the biggest issue. Otherwise, we fully appreciate what he has brought.
Last
we had all those
SLFP
things.
supported me on these. The last meeting had the leader of the house and no one from the UNP. They all supported the reforms I brought, and I really hope, I'm not there to push them, but those reforms are all there.
But
Everything
it
he
has
said
to-
is there.
No, but it has to go through the speaker because the standing orders is a matter completely finally. It must come through the speaker and it
But
must
the
come to the
speaker chaired
parliament.
the meeting.
But he never presented to the parliament.
Minister
That we were-
Rajapaksa,
we were
let's talk about
participating in so many meetings.
the corruption aspect.
But
On
he
the
didn't,
26th
Shamil, he didn't
of
say about the bribery committee.
we will talk a little bit about that as well on the second round. With regard to the corruption allegations that have been leveled, Minister, on the 26th of February we saw the treasury bond issue coming into play. However, nothing concrete has been taken as yet. We saw even the President in his speech saying that he requested the Prime Minister to remove the Governor of the Central Bank.
There were several steps taken. One was that some people had gone to the bribery commission. So another group had filed a fundamental rights application in the Supreme Court. I think that application got dismissed. Then when it came up before the party leaders in the parliament, in fact, Mr. Lakshman Kiriyala, myself, suggested that this must be investigated through the COPE committee. And that is how it was taken up before the COPE committee. We have not given up that issue, whether it is right or wrong, since there is a doubt in the minds of the people that there had been some irregularity or some misconduct. Certainly that we will go through that inquiry and have a complete report either through the COPE or whatever other machineries that is available.
Minister Rajapaksa, before you run out of questions, I want to ask you. It has been suggested that the United States, at the upcoming UN Human Rights Council sessions in Geneva, will be adopting or will be proposing a resolution that will support the establishment of a domestic mechanism in Sri Lanka. Now, I'm sure that you've met with the visiting Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs, Ms. Biswal, and with other officials as well. What is expected from a domestic mechanism? Restorative justice or retributive justice?
Really, there was no any commitment on our part. That's the Ms. Biswal and other representatives, that they were quite happy with the improvement of the human rights condition, upholding of the rule of law. Especially they were really inspired by the way that we conducted the free and fair election on 17th August, and we have maintained the religious harmony among all the communities during last 8 months, and they expressed their that's the gratitude for it as a country that we have maintained the law and order. And therefore that's on their own they came out with the suggestion that they will bring out this resolution in Geneva, allowing us to have a domestic mechanism that is not only us, that even the previous regime throughout we were agitating that there should not be any international investigation, domestic mechanism will be sufficient. Now that we have achieved our target, now with regard to as to how that we must set up the domestic mechanism and what are the components, and all those things were never discussed, and there was no any commitment from our side. It is a matter for us to decide. It is our discretion.
Thank you very much, Minister Rajapaksa. We are in conversation with Tamara Kurunagam, Minister Vijayasa Rajapaksa, and also Professor Rajiv Jayasinghe. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we will discuss more about the US-sponsored resolution in Geneva. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. The second round, we start off with Professor Rajiv Jayasinghe, leader of the Liberal Party and also former UPFA nationalist parliamentarian. You said that you complained about international relations, international foreign policy, and that the former administration, that is the Mahinda Rajapaksa administration, was not able to concretely cement its position internationally. And you complained about its foreign policy as well, Professor Rajiv Jayasinghe, for many times. Are you satisfied the way in which this government has progressed with regard to building its foreign relations?
Not at all, because if you remember, the manifesto of the President made it very clear that we would go back to traditional non-aligned foreign policy. I think one of the biggest mistakes made by the last government was that it managed to alienate India, which was, I think, a great pity. And of course, it didn't dialogue enough with the West. I think there was a lack of communication on many issues, starting with the fact that way back in 2009, there was a Kerry report asking certain questions and the way about the war. And the way it was phrased was actually in our favor, because it actually pointed out that some of the allegations were disproved by American satellite evidence. The government never even bothered to respond to that. I asked several times. I said, I can write those because I had all the material in the Peace Secretariat archives. But the government just was arrogant enough to think we don't need to answer questions. Now, what has happened now, unfortunately, is what seems to me to be subservience to the West and not enough of the non-alignment. And this reminds me of what actually happened under J.R. Jayawardena. You know, there are many people in the UNP who are delighted that they say the West is now very friendly to us. But don't forget that in the 80s, the West was also very friendly. But then when push came to shove, they did not support us when there were conflicts with other countries. And we can't expect them to. Because, you know, American foreign policy in particular, don't forget it's a democratic country. When the election comes, there may be pressures. And America will have to respond to those pressures electorally. And that is why I think we need to make sure that we cement relations with all countries. I was one of those who argued very heavily that there was far too much reliance on China, but I always said we have to continue friends with China, because China, after all, came to our assistance at times of difficulty. They came to our economic support when other countries, not that they were against us, but they either didn't have the money or they couldn't make the decisions quickly enough. So we should never have alienated them. But the President's manifesto, centrality to India, the non-aligned nations and so on, has been ignored by this government. And I think that's a great pity. I'm also sorry that one of the factors in the President's manifesto about the diversity of India, about greater stress on the regions, you know, last government also ignored dealing with Tamil Nadu, with all the other states. Our present High Commissioner has done a good job on that, but he was suddenly transferred. And although I'm sure the new man will do his best, I think this lack of continuity, this lack of clear policies that our envoys have to fulfill is very sad, and I wish that we had actually fleshed out the section on the policy making, which should be done by consensus, not simply because Nisha Biswal comes and says we'll move a resolution or whatever. The planning is inadequate at the moment, and this was the problem with the last government. I think it's going to continue a problem now.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Jayasinghe. I now move on to the Minister of Justice, Vijayasa Rajapaksa. Minister, many are alleging that the present regime is trying to act based on the whim and fancy of the international community. We know for a fact that the US has a bipartisan policy towards Sri Lanka, and it cannot change its policies just because a government has been appointed. However, from a resolution that went against Sri Lanka for a resolution that is now supportive of Sri Lanka in September, what does it show? Does it show that the US has been able to appoint a government on their wish?
Not at all. As we said before the election, prior to the presidential and parliamentary both, our foreign policy is non-aligned foreign policy. We are having contacts with relations with all the countries, whatever the country which is the connected to us, whatever the way, we are maintaining our goodwill and friendship. Even with the China, that's President, I myself accompanied that, we signed 5 contracts when President visited China, and that there was no any difference of that. They welcome the new government and new head of the state. We signed 5 contracts, whereas that they had promised us to give some grants for hospitals, kidney hospitals, maternity hospitals and various other things amounting to US dollars 800 million. But during the past regime, they had lot of transactions, we know, but all were borrowings. Not a single dollar had been given to us as a donation. All these things for the Hambantota port, that Matala airport, everything was a loan. But due to the goodwill that we have extended with that government, Chinese government, they are willing to give us certain donations for us to build hospitals and various things running up to over $800 million. Then with the European Union and America, that you cannot forget the fact that most of our economic ties are with those countries. Just forgetting about that America and European Union, whereas a lot of Sri Lankans also living there. If somebody expect that we must develop our friendship with some other country, that's whereas these some other countries which was developed friendship by the previous president, I cannot remember the name, some countries in African region, that will not help us. But still that we will have to maintain the friendship. But our transactions are mostly with America and European Union, India, Japan, China. That our relationship with all these countries that we have maintained intact, that there is no any deviation. Even we have signed several contracts with Russia after the change of the government, and most of the tourists that who come and spend here, which is beneficial for the development of the country, are either from European countries or America, and therefore that we will have to maintain all those things. They are not bothered about the government, whether it is UNP or SLF. It makes no matters for USO or the countries in the European Union. What they need is what they are concerned. It is the trend in all over the world. That is the duty, one of the duties of the United Nations also. They are concerned about the human rights, protection of human rights, and the upholding of the rule of law, good governance, ethnic harmony. And during last 8 months, that we have demonstrated to the entire world that we have maintained that peace to the utmost. That's the to the utmost level. And that is why they are agreeable to withdraw all these allegations and allow us to have a domestic.
Mr. Rajapaksa, very quickly, the former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, following his defeat, said that it is the West and India that defeated him at the elections. And when you really look at the relationship that your government has maintained, it's the West and India. So
if somebody has to make that allegation, then he has to concede that the voters are from West and America or India. I think my personal opinion is that just ridiculous statement should not have been made anybody in this country. That will damage our diplomacy.
Thank you very much, Minister Vijaydas Rajapaksa. I now move on to Ms. Tamara Kurunagam, a former Sri Lankan representative to the United Nations in Geneva. Ms. Kurunagam, President Maithripala Sirisena was elected on the 8th of January, telling the people, campaigning, that there needs to be change of governance in the country. Corruption has to be eradicated. Last 8 months, are you satisfied the way in which the United National Party has taken the ball and started running the extra mile?
As coming up from the discussion that we've had earlier on before the break on corruption and good governance, yes, that was the campaign on which the president and the campaign, the UNP campaign, has been based, and also the JVP, good governance and anti-corruption. Now, I think this past 8 months has shown that has raised the questions, doubts about whether this was really genuine or not, whether it was simply used to get rid of Mahinda Rajapaksa, because that, I think, was the objective of the presidential election: get rid of him, and in general elections to keep him out. And if one is genuinely concerned about corruption and good governance, then one would look at the two sides of the picture. You have those who are corrupt and those who corrupt. There cannot be just one side, that one person is corrupt and takes money. There's nobody on the other side who's there to corrupt the person. Generally, corruption, where all over the world, who are these people who corrupt? And usually these are people with a lot of money, and it's big business. And we see that in elections around the world, in France and elsewhere, that in the United States, that big business has put a lot of money into elections. And this has happened also here. So elections also that's also corruption, when you take money from big companies, because you provide a service to them, so you make promises to them, not towards the people but those who fund you. And it doesn't I was actually quite surprised when one of the political parties, and I didn't expect it to come from them, was the JVP, after the election thanked the enterprises for having supported them. So now if the present regime, the UNP, is really wants to address corruption and good governance, ensure good governance, then they have to also take action against those who corrupt. So that means address the root causes of corruption. Corruption became systematic in Sri Lanka. It was after the economies opened in 1977, and then it became a problem, and it became systematic, and that was with the opening of the economy, your foreign investments coming in, and competition, and that created the grounds for corruption. So we have to go back then. We can't just talk only about corruption now. We have to go back and address the real issues. So I would be very happy to see if the present regime not only addresses those who are corrupt, but also goes to those big companies and sees that, files action against those huge companies, including foreign companies, one, and two is ensures good governance and transparency also among those companies. I would be happy to see that happening, but I doubt very much. And just because I doubt it, because there has nothing happened so far, then it appears to us the whole good governance, corruption, anti-corruption campaign was simply it was a witch hunt. It was a witch hunt. It was not serious, and I think they have lost credibility.
Ms. Kurunagam, on a different subject relating to the United Nations resolution that would be presented in Geneva, the US-sponsored resolution that would come in Geneva. You've been at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for nearly 15 years. You were also a diplomat representing Sri Lanka. What does this resolution really mean? Very quickly, I'll give you 1 minute.
Well, I heard you say earlier on that this is something, a resolution that was going to be favorable to Sri Lanka. Now, there is no resolution that can be favorable to Sri Lanka, simply because if it was favorable, there wouldn't be a resolution. Because the idea of having a resolution at the Human Rights Council is to keep Sri Lanka on the agenda. And they want to keep Sri Lanka on the agenda because they have a reliable ally at the moment in government, but not a stable one. So they want to ensure, apart from having this national government, they want to have a Damocles sword hanging over your head, so they can say, okay, if you don't play our game, then we are going to move the resolution. Now we have to first see what the resolution is. Most probably that resolution will, and that's what Biswal said, she said it's going to be a resolution on a domestic mechanism. That's not new. The earlier resolution was also domestic mechanism, plus there was the report of the High Commissioner. So that's the international dimension, investigation by a UN international entity. Now, she also said that this resolution will include the findings of that report, plus the recommendations. I would like to know what those findings are. So probably war crimes is going to be brought in. That wasn't in the earlier resolutions, it's human rights. And I would also like to know what the recommendations are. And I won't be surprised because she also said there should be international collaboration collaboration on the domestic mechanism. So what form, what mechanism will that resolution come up with for international involvement in the domestic process? That also would be interesting to see what the resolution actually comes up with. Perhaps they would come with the idea of a field presence inside the country.
Mr. Rajapaksa, you want to add?
I want to add, because that I think that Tamara also just trying to create a phobia which was trying to be created by President Mahinda Rajapaksa before all these elections, by showing that just to maintain their power. Anybody who has been in the foreign service, in the diplomatic service, who failed to save the country, who failed to secure the interest, national interest of this country, now trying to give different interpretation. I think that it should not be.
I think Tamara, I'm going to give you the right to respond to that.
Because that is not correct, that those who fail.
Minister, let's have Tamara's version as well. Ms. Kurunagam? Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, because I'm not here to defend Mahinda Rajapaksa nor the previous regime. I have worked for more than 10 years in the United Nations. I worked in the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. I know exactly how it functions, and I also know what to read a resolution, because I worked on draft resolutions. So I know what it means, and I know what the language is, and we also know what the US is trying to achieve internationally within the multilateral system. And the objective of the United States is to dismantle the multilateral system and to legitimize a unilateral intervention. And that is why the development of the norm, right, responsibility to protect the development of the third pillar. I would be ready, Minister, to explain to you what the third pillar of the responsibility to protect is, and that is not Mahinda Rajapaksa.
I want the producer to stop the timing for a minute, because I want Mr. Rajapaksa to also have a fair chance to respond to that question. Please stop the timing. Yes, thank you very much.
Pardon for me saying this one, if Tamara was still continuing in the service, that she should never have come out with this kind of story. Because during that period, I am not making a personal allegation against one person, and I am not going to give any description about the people that who are holding the positions of our diplomatic corps. And there was a lot of failures, there are mishandling. That is why that the country had to face a lot of international issues, and that failure, of course, that we have rectified within a shortest possible time period. I don't think that anybody with understanding of the international the relationship and the diplomatic relations, they can underestimate what we have gained during last 8 months period. How can you say that they want to keep the Sri Lanka fixed?
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, Tamara, for the response. I want the time to start running again. Bandura?
I would like to add to that. Now, at that time, I think President Rajapaksa had to take a stand. I was the Consul General in Toronto at that time. We were under siege. I was very insecure, and I was protected by the Canadian government that time. And whereas Mr. Palihakara, who's the governor in the north, was holding on in New York. And there he had the support of China and Russia against a resolution. So what happened was, the problem what President Rajapaksa had, you don't have it. Because you can move freely, when Mr. Sambandhan can move freely in Jaffna, because he ended terrorism. That is what, now this is the second stage which you are in. So I would say, I know Rajiv knows where Kushner and Miliband came and asked him to stop it, which for 30 years the international community didn't help, and where we had all weather friends like China and Russia and Pakistan. That, I mean, I must make that thing. Having said that, I would want to say that the minister said, because what I wanted to say is he had to act according to that during the circumstances. But I want to say, you said you are non-aligned. Are you really non-aligned? Are we really non-aligned in this country? That's my question to you, Minister.
Non-aligned means that it doesn't mean that you will have to treat to every country like, Kwasil and some king came during the last regime. But especially with the countries that where we are having negotiations, we are having trade transactions, in addition to that with the countries with the world power, that's we are non-aligned. So we have not subjugated to any country. That's our
I'm sure the country would decide.
Mr. Rajapaksa, I'd like to ask you about the resolution that will be proposed, because even though it is being said that they will support a domestic mechanism, there's also hints being dropped about international collaboration, international consultation. Where does the government stand on this?
No, this is what, not really this government, even the previous regime.
I'll rephrase the question. If the UN Human Rights Council, by a vote, decides that you should have a domestic mechanism where you will have international consultation, maybe a homegrown mechanism, but maybe an international judge. If they ask you for something like that, what will be your response?
No, not only this government, even before we came into power, even the previous government, their commitment was that we need not have any international investigation, that you must allow us to have a domestic mechanism to resolve our all issues, accepting our sovereignty as a sovereign country with equal rights as a member country of the United Nations. Then of course, as to what kind of mechanism to be set up is not yet discussed, and we have not committed to anybody. It's purely a matter that we will have to discuss, we will have to, if necessary, to get experts' opinion, and then we will decide that domestic mechanism.
Professor Rajiv Singh, you want to respond to this?
Yes, I think one of our problems is we just don't go into the record. I think Tamara is perfectly right when she mentioned the fact that the so-called persecution of Sri Lanka began a long time ago. I think there was universal acclamation of the success of Danja Telaka when he was permanent representative, when there were attempts to get us to stop the war, Miliband and Kushner, as you said, resolutions against us, special sessions, we won resoundingly. I wish there were the same respect for what happened then. But there was also a myth which some people in the foreign ministry who were anti-Indian put forward, that all this began because of Dayan. The simple fact is there was a resolution tabled against us in 2006, long before Dayan went there, which is the type of thing that Tamara described, the sword of Damocles effect. And don't forget, this type of, let's say, intervention in Geneva actually began in Georgia Wagner's time. You remember when resolutions were brought, Argentina brought a resolution against us. So this has been common practice all these years. Now Sri Lanka won the resolution in 2007, but the stupidest thing that the Rajapaksa government did was it sacked Dayan Jayatillaka. And why? Because he was agitating for implementation of the 13th Amendment, and the triumphalists were against this. They replaced him with someone who lost the coalition. As one Indian told me, in Dayan's time you asked us for advice, now when there is a vote you come and ask us to vote for you. And Tamara was sent in at the last minute. I think Dr. Rajapaksa was suggesting she lost the vote in Geneva. I know perfectly well that the strategy she was introducing was working, because I was asked to go. I refused to go initially because I didn't want to have anything to do with the mess that the foreign ministry was creating. But then I went along. The Indian government was entirely supportive of us till some of the people who went from Sri Lanka went and lost that Indian support as well. So the
under the Rajapaksa regime.
Sorry?
Under the Rajapaksa
Absolutely.
regime.
And I mean, I'm not saying this now. I said this in 2011-12. You know, don't forget when Mahinda Rajapaksa was president, I was the only one in that whole parliamentary party who absolutely criticized the foreign policy.
Well, may I say something?
So that I think it's fair to say,
because
can I just finish what I was saying? So that I think it's fair to say that we need to observe the historical record, and I think Minister Rajapaksa, you should check it all from the history, because you will find, and you know, I do believe that people like you believe in honesty, and I think you have to be very careful sometimes against your colleagues who may end up worse than some of the people you were opposed to earlier.
Yes, Tamara.
No, I would just like, because I didn't quite understand that the minister had said I was responsible for having lost the...
but not personally, that's
okay,
I didn't.
no, but
for the previous regime.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me come back, because we are talking about 2012 March. But nobody remembers September 2011, when I was parachuted in from Cuba a month before the Human Rights Council. I didn't even know there was a draft resolution, which had been kept away from me. We managed, with our working through the non-aligned movement, to have that US resolution that was presented by Canada withdrawn. So there was a resolution on the table. The resolution said put Sri Lanka on the agenda for the March 2012 session for interactive dialogue, and we managed to have that withdrawn. So that was a victory. 2012 March, it was the head of our delegation who went and publicly said India was supporting us when the Indians said not to make it public for their political reasons.
Minister Rajapaksa was referring to the previous regime and the manner in which certain diplomats did act during the past. Yes, for us,
Minister, could you tell me once and for all, will the UNP hand over and betray Mahinda Rajapaksa and Gotabaya Rajapaksa and perhaps Sarath Fonseca? Yes or no?
I think what is the foundation of your question? It's a meaningless question.
No, it's not meaningless.
It's meaningless for the reason now the America
How can you say that?
Who brought that resolution to have an international mechanism just to investigate into the certain matters that were human rights violation said to have been occurred during the last phase of the war.
Yeah.
Now they are withdrawing and they say that you better have your own domestic mechanism.
Is that because...
In fact, the betrayal, I will remind you, I have the document, the betrayal document. This is the document that was signed during the Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa's regime on 23rd of May 2009 without having the knowledge of the Prime Minister, without informing the ministers of the cabinet, without knowing...
What is the betrayal, Minister?
That is the document by which that he undertook. He permitted that Ban Ki-moon to have an international mechanism to investigate into the violation of human rights.
No, that's not quite correct.
That is 23rd of 2009, 23rd May. You cannot say no for the reason when you look at the terms of reference that has been given to Darusman by Ban Ki-moon,
no
General Secretary.
reference has been made about an international...
No. What that document says, and I know it by heart, the Secretary General raised certain concerns, and the President agreed to address those concerns.
That's right.
So that has nothing to do internationally. Rubbish.
And
I fully agree that the President did not live up to that commitment immediately. He appointed the LLRC far too late. But there was no mention, Mr. Rajapaksa, about international intervention then. The President agreed to address those concerns.
There is no direct reference.
He was wrong not to address those concerns then. He should have done it domestically immediately. We urged him to do it. I kept telling him to do it.
I shall read the relevant part. The Sri Lanka reiterated its strongest commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights in keeping with international human rights standards and Sri Lanka's international obligations.
Exactly. Yes.
Then the Secretary General underlined the importance of an accountability process for addressing violation of international humanitarian and human rights law. The government will take the measures to address those grievances.
But there is no direct reference.
About international. Mr. Rajapaksa, don't people.
You give time.
I need time.
Yes, please.
I need to time.
Yes, Minister.
We also know what Darusman did.
Yes.
Once then the Darusman, when Ban Ki-moon appointed the Darusman, the terms of reference clearly refer to the so-called, that's the name is given, misnomer, joint statement. It is not a joint statement. That terms had been given just to mislead the Sri Lankan government. It is not a joint statement, it's an undertaking on behalf of the government. As a result, this Sri Lankan president appointed LLRC. That is the domestic mechanism that they intended at that time. Then Ban Ki-moon went and he appointed Darusman committee. In the Darusman committee, terms of reference categorically says that is with the mandate that
but the joint communique does not specifically mention the fact that the internal...
One Darusman was appointed before the LLRC.
Yes, please.
Now then thereafter, after the appointment of the Darusman committee and once the report was made, the letter written by Professor G.L. Pires, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, 2 months before the release of Darusman report, that is 15th February 2011. What does he say? That His Excellency President Mahinda Rajapaksa has directed me to convey his warm greeting and very good wishes for the success of all your endeavors. Now the question is, what is the endeavor that he was engaged in prior to this date, in between the date conclusion of the war and 15th of February 2011? What was the endeavor that was engaged by Ban Ki-moon?
Let's pose the question
only
to-
endeavor was the appointment of Darusman and having a report.
Let's not assume, Minister. What is the endeavour, Professor Vijay
I
Singh?
think that is just, I mean, you have to ask G.L. Pires to explain his own language, because that is not a mind I understand very well. But I think that was flowery language intended to just say, you know, all the best, the classic thing. Where I think Mr. Vijayadasa got it wrong, but let me say I think the government got it wrong. After that original statement, which was to address the concerns, nothing was done. In fact, the LNRC was only appointed after Darusman was appointed.
That is right.
Yeah.
That's correct.
No, you said put it the other way around. But the reason why the Secretary General appointed Darusman, which I think was a pity, was because the Sri Lankan government had not addressed those concerns as promised. I think where you would be right to fault the government is in failing to live up to several commitments that were made, including, as I said, failing to answer John Kerry. But the whole idea of an international intervention was something that I believe Sri Lanka should resist. I think we made a great mistake.
However, according to the
Can I-
Rome
can I-
working
Statute,
with our
Yes.
traditional allies to turn this down, and I think Tamara will tell you also what happened in
Can I
2002.
come back
Yes,
on,
Tamara.
on this Darusman business, because I think there is it's misleading and misinterpretation of the UN system. When the minister refers to the Darusman, he refers to Darusman Committee, Darusman an international investigation, or in something that he has set up. Darusman, which is not, it's not a formal body. It's not. It was set up by the Secretary General as to advise him. He set it up. It is a personal matter. It was not set up by the UN. It has no official status. So this Darusman report has no meaning, and this is why when I was there, we prevented the Darusman report
Minister,
from being submitted
two
to
months
the council.
before the publication of this particular report in question, you wrote to Ban Ki-moon saying that he's going against the UN Charter. I recollect this because
few
you spoke
days-
to
few
President
days
Mahinda
before
Rajapaksa and the leader of the opposition. Before that.
Yes, just give
And-
me,
yeah.
just to answer to what Tamara's raised was, now I concede that he appointed Darusman on the pretext that is for him to have his own advice as a panel of experts. That is correct. This is, one can give the interpretation this is unofficial. It makes no difference whether it is unofficial or official. When the resolution was brought before the Geneva Human Rights Commission, all these allegations were based upon the contents of Darusman report. If
However,
not
you
for
said that it
Darusman,
goes against the UN Charter. Writing a
I-
letter to
I-
Ban Ki-moon,
I-
you
of
said
course
that
that-
it
no,
goes
I
against the
took
UN
up the
Charter
legal.
and there cannot be an international investigation because Sri Lanka is not a signatory to the Rome Statute of 2002.
in fact, that it was in the media that after Darusman report was released, that's the UN was trying to straight away go to the International Criminal Court of Justice to initiate legal action against Sri Lanka. At that time, then I referred to certain provisions, articles of the United Nations Charter, and pointed out that the Secretary General has no that power. If you have to directly go to the International Court of Justice, that there has to be a resolution of the Security Council. This is not a matter which was not taken up before the Security Council because they knew that they can get it passed, especially this Russia and China, both were openly supporting us. And they couldn't directly get into this thing. That is why they indirectly got the consent of the Sri Lankan government in terms of the exception given in Rome Convention Article 12. Although you are not a party to the Rome Convention, still, if a country has given the consent to have some international investigation into the violation of human rights, that they have got the power to do it. They made use this document, the purported joint statement they made use by using it that they gave a terms of reference to Darusman. Then the Darusman said that they have got the authority from the Sri Lankan government just to cover that this exceptional clause of the Rome Convention. Then they incorporated all these allegations that has been leveled in this Darusman report in the resolution that they presented to the Geneva Human Rights Committee, where it says that there had been the killing of 40,000 civilians, the killing of the people who surrendered and came with white flags, and that there had been shelling of bombs on hospitals, all those things. This is the beginning. That's nobody can deny the fact
Yes,
that
Tamara.
this is the beginning.
I just want to. It is not the problem is not this particular statement or declaration that the minister is referring to. And the government previously has systematically opposed the resolution in the Human Rights Council, because those resolutions were, yes, based on the Darusman report, which were not acceptable to the government and were not brought into the Human Rights Council at all. But now, with the report of the High Commissioner, that's Darusman Plus. The report that is going to come out will be based on this report, and for the first time, this report, Darusman, is going to be given credibility.
We have not seen the
and
content of this particular report in question.
We haven't
Tamara,
seen
so
it,
let's
but
not
it will be.
assume it's going to be a Darusman
We can,
Plus
yeah,
report.
we can assume, because they have tried to bring this report in formally to the council. It was done through the office of the High Commissioner, through the High Commissioner herself, and they couldn't bring it in, and therefore it's going to be incorporated, because they will use most
The preambles
of the
and the operative clauses of the US-sponsored resolution that is going to come into play in September. What would the operative clauses and the preambles would be? Because it is in support of Sri Lanka.
Yeah, what will happen is they will now, up to now Sri Lanka has opposed the resolution, so which means we don't accept it. Even if we lost the resolution, we don't accept it. But this time, I have heard Biswa say she's hoping it's going to be a consensus resolution, which means she wants the government to accept it. Now, and that resolution will probably have definitely reference to the so-called findings and recommendations of that High Commissioner's report, which will be there. There'll probably be reference, if they're referring to findings, there will be reference to war crimes for the first time, because all the previous resolutions were on human rights, reconciliation, accountability, domestic mechanism with international cooperation. This time they probably will have the findings, they will have the recommendations, they will say continue with the domestic mechanism, but they will probably introduce some kind of an international presence or a mechanism which will enable international involvement inside. And if it is a consensus resolution, it means we are accepting Darusman. That's when the problem will come in, not at the time, not the previous
complete misleading.
Yes,
I don't think that you should make it. Now, when you are in the foreign service, when you are representing Sri Lanka, when you are employed by the Sri Lankan government, what did you make the representations to the international community? Forget about this international mechanism. Allow us to have a domestic mechanism. That is what you agitated. You, as a representative of Sri Lanka, in an important place like Geneva, they were agitating that we need to have a domestic mechanism, not an international investigation. That is the stance taken up by former President Mahinda Rajapaksa and his regime. Tamara also carried that message to the whole world.
What is the position of the UN?
No,
I will maintain that. I still maintain it.
Still, but you are trying to now introduce for the first time the war crime is coming in here, and that they are going to get agitated about the war crime.
We cannot suggest anything.
That is
That's
incorrect.
Right, Minister. We
that
cannot
is
suggest
false.
anything.
That is incorrect.
We will have to wait and see until the report is published.
No. Yes.
We cannot suggest or we cannot assume that the report is going to contain
Tamara said
this.
was that according to the consensus resolution that is to be given, that she was trying to give the flavor, that the question of war crimes also been investigated. The term war crimes.
Let's wait and see, Minister. Let's wait and see what exactly happens. I want to move on very quickly and pose a question about national government now, relating to our core areas of discussion today. In 2001, let's talk about 2015 first, initially. You have a president representing the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, who is also the chairman of the UPFA and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. And then you have a prime minister representing the UNC. In 2001, a similar scenario took place. We saw President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga heading the SLFP, and then you saw PM Ranil Wickremesinghe being elected by the people at the general elections and taking over as the Prime Minister. However, it only was there for 2.5 years or so. This government, what's going to happen?
No, that is a completely different scenario. Now, this J.R. Jayawardena followed the Gaulli system, the de Gaulle's constitutional system here. Even this had happened in France in 1986 to 89. Similar situation prevailed in France, that François Mitterrand, although the government was on the other side, he continues 2.5 years, exactly like Ms. Kumaratunga in 2001 to 2004 did. But that was not a consensual government. That she had to honor the mandate of the people in the general election, and she had to hand over the government to the United National Party. Here, of course, the situation is completely different. although the President Maithripala Sirisena is the head of the leader of the SLP and the UPFA, in fact that we who brought him as the common candidate and got elected basically through the voters of the United National Party, and also that we came out with a consensual manifesto that's both together after winning the election, presidential election. Then there was a short period, interim period of 100 days. Then we gave some specific undertaking what we are going to do, although that we couldn't complete 100%, more than 90%, that's we completed. And after that we asked for a mandate for both the SLP head, the president, and also the UNP leader, prime minister, and the UNP national government to run. Now the mandate has been given. For that, of course, as I said, that there is an interpretation given in the 19th Amendment. In fact, that it was not there. Professor Raji was there. That we had to give a certain interpretation while we were discussing, debating at the committee stage. Accordingly, the national government, as interpreted in the Constitution, is the amalgamation of two major political parties who get the most number of seats in the Parliament. But it doesn't mean that we are going to exclude JVP or TNA. We wanted to have each and every party to act together and to form a national government. It doesn't mean all should take ministerial posts, but all should take part in the reforms.
Professor Vijay Singh, very quickly, I'll give you 1 minute. 1 minute.
Well, two things. One is, in fact, the constitutional provision. That was the original provision, the biggest and the second biggest. It was amended, I think unfortunately amended. It now reads the biggest party and the political parties in Parliament, which on a reading of English means all the parties. Absolutely. And that's why I take Tamara's point that it's not a national government. But I'm all in favor of this coalition government. I also think the point is that Mr. Rajapaksa should also register that this mandate was given not just to the UNP. It was actually given to the UNP under President Sirisena, because he also contributed to its victory. So that is why I hope this will be a genuine consensual coalition government, and that it will fulfill those elements in the manifesto that were ignored. It's not 90%. Of the structural reforms, only one was done, and some of them were completely forgotten. So those have to be done. And I believe the driving force in them will be President Sirisena. I also think as far as the elimination of corruption is concerned, and I think Mr. Vijaydas Rajapaksa will agree with me, that the record of some of his colleagues needs better attention. And that is where I think President Sirisena will have to take the leadership in making sure that all those things are eliminated, and that we actually now have a better adherence to the principles on which he was elected than we saw in the last 8 months.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Vijay Singh. We now move on to a short commercial break. When we come back, it's the final round. This is Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. The final round, we start off with Ms. Tamara Kulnagam. 2 minutes to final remarks. Time starts now.
Yeah. Well, what I would like to say is that I hope that whatever government that is formed, whether it's a national government, which is highly unlikely, but it probably will be a coalition government, and that government will address the questions that are of interest to the majority of the Sri Lankan people, and I mean there in terms of their socio-economic well-being and their working conditions, and that the government will try to build a domestic economy on which the majority of the Sri Lankan people can live in dignity, that is, live in dignity in their own countries and not go looking for cheap labor positions abroad. And I hope also that in their own country they will find jobs that will also be will give them value and worth. And also I would hope that in the same vein that the government in place will promote genuine national reconciliation, and for this there has to be involvement of the parties that represent the Tamil people. I think we've gone through 30 years of war, and I think we have to take into account all this, all that has gone on in the past 30 years, address the root causes and arrive at a reconciliation, and that the good governance and corruption don't remain just words. or just used to batter somebody around, but at least will be genuine and will be implemented. And I hope that we will be able to build an economy, unite the people, which I don't know, it doesn't augur very well, the beginning of this the year, with the decisions that have been taken by the so far, at least by the government, and the activities that we have seen so far, that it will be a country that will be able to live in independently as a sovereign nation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tamara Kurunagam. I think very interesting point. At the end of the day, Sri Lankans have to live independently in a sovereign state. Important point indeed. I now move on to Professor Rajiva Vijayasinghe. Your time starts now.
Yes, I think the most important thing which we haven't really looked at the moment is the whole question of reconciliation. There has been far too little stress on that in the 5 years of the Rajapaksa government from 2010 onwards, and then in the last 6 months. That is a key, and it should not be in terms of domestic inquiries or whatever. Those are a component of it, but the vital thing is to actually have policies that integrate all our people together with full empowerment and full equality. With regard to this business of domestic mechanism, I think Mr. Rajapaksa is also correct. I think everyone is agreed that should happen. I think it was a great pity that the last government was far too slow about it, but I should also say that I think this government should be more urgent. One of the first things I did when I was part of the government was I brought up the question of the Udalagama Commission, which I think was an excellent commission, and it shows that Sri Lanka can do its own investigation thoroughly and fairly. And the Prime Minister said he would try to publish that. He forgot all about it. When I brought it up the next meeting, he said, oh, I forgot. It wasn't even minuted. So that is where we have to move quickly, because we must show that our commissions can also do their work, and we should take action. And while I disagreed with the last government, which didn't publish that report and didn't take action, there was a sort of siege mentality there. This government had no excuse. So I hope you'll push for that, the Udalagama Commission, and indeed all the commissions, and action on things like the Trinco 5, because that is a state where justice is needed. But I also think it's important that the question of war crimes came up. As you said, we don't know what's happening, we don't know what's in the report, but I hope we can have a categorical assurance from you that if war crimes is introduced into any resolution, that Sri Lanka will not allow it to pass by consensus, and they will resist that. I think, as Tamara said, accountability, human rights, which is very vital, reconciliation, harmony, all those things we must all consensually move towards. Sri Lanka must take the lead, but advice and assistance from other countries should always be welcome on that on our terms. What we should not accept is the great victory against terrorism being turned into persecution on war crimes, because this country does not deserve it the way that I think some international figures who are, terrorist movements
Thank you very much,
Liberia should. That is, we are different.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe. I now move on to Minister of Justice, Dr. Vijayasa Rajapaksa, for your final remarks.
No, in fact, that I concede that both speakers talk about the national reconciliation. The most important priority will be given for that one. The biggest mistake that we were very critical about the previous government, that's the previous government believed that national reconciliation means construction of highways and construction of building in the northern and eastern provinces. They were not bothered about the dignity of the communities. We have understood it. That is why we have given the foremost consideration for the national reconciliation. Simultaneously, we are expecting to have a constituent assembly within next 1 to 2 years time, then just to have a completely a new constitution. At the same time that we were given the priority to appoint the Constitutional Council, and thereafter to appoint new commissioners for all these independent commissions. I think Bandul also raised an important issue about this bribery commission. I think apparently they made a mistake about making that closing of that bribery commission. It is not. What we will have to do is that soon after that the session is started, soon after the formation of the Constitutional Council, we will have to get the new commissioners appointed. Then automatically the appointments of the former commissioners' tenure will be relinquished. And this is what we are going to do. In addition to that, of course, there are few very, very important and urgent bills if you have to curb corruptions, so one of the aspects is just to immediately introduce and enact this right to information bill. Some were making allegations that we were delaying it. In fact, that there was no any delay until the 19th amendment was passed, that the parliament had no power to bring a bill of this nature, because this power was given by newly added article 14 of the new 19th amendment. In addition to that, National Audit Commission, and I have got the cabinet approval for the Children's Judicial Protection Bill. With all those things, I think that we can expect a better future for this country.
Thank you very much, Minister Rajapaksa. Thank you very much, Mr. Mara Kurunayakam, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Minister of Justice, Dr. Vyasa Rajapaksa, for joining us, and also Professor Rajiv Vijay, who is no stranger to this show, and nice to have you on board as well. Thank you very much, Nadeem. Thank you very much, Faraz. Bandula, will I be seeing you next week?
Let's see.
Next week, Friday? 7:30?
Yeah, hopefully.
Looking forward to seeing you as well, Bandula. I want to leave you tonight with a quote. It's easy to dream every night, but difficult to fight for a dream. Let's not keep the people fighting or dreaming anymore. For the parliamentarians, for the government, act now, act fast for a better tomorrow. Good night and God bless.